The Great Depression that followed America's Roaring Twenties stands as both the most severe economic catastrophe of the 20th century and the worst hangover in history. In the US, 1/3 of the banks collapsed, 1/4 of the population were left unemployed, bread lines and Hoovervilles sprung up across the country, and Al Capone started his own soup kitchen. The crash's impact was so intense that its effects were transmitted worldwide. Global trade fell by around 60%, and deflation spread like wildfire. People starved, children got rickets, and millions were forced to stay home and play Monopoly. On Thursday, the 24th of October, 1929, the street outside of New York Stock Exchange was filled with a fearful and nervous crowd waiting for the doors to open. The last hour of trading on Wednesday had seen the financial market plummet, with 2.6 million shares being frantically sold. When trading opened, their worst fears were realized. That Thursday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped by 11% as panicked investors sold off their shares en masse. Friday and Saturday saw a brief rally as Wall Street bankers fought to prop up the market. But the bubble had burst, and Black Monday brought a further fall of 13%. It crashed another 12% on Black Tuesday. In the panic, 16.4 million shares were sold. Millions more ended up worthless, and on the Monday and Tuesday alone, $30 billion in share value was lost. This was 10 times the annual federal budget and over $377 billion in today's money. The faces that had crowded the streets on Thursday were left broken and bereft. One witness said, "There were no smiles. There were no tears either. Just the camaraderie of fellow sufferers. Everybody wanted to tell their neighbor how much he had lost. Nobody wanted to listen. It was too repetitious a tale." Rumors spread about investors committing suicide en masse. Social commentator Will Rogers later joked that you had to stand in line to get a window to jump out of, and Eddie Kantzer quipped that when he'd requested a room at a nearby hotel, he'd been asked for sleeping or jumping. However, there was no truth to this myth, and suicide rates were actually lower that week than they'd been in the previous year. Although the crash marked the start of the Great Depression, it wasn't a cause as much as a symptom. The US had just been enjoying the Roaring Twenties, a period of high employment, jazz, and the explosion of investment in the stock market. It was a gold rush. Ordinary people found they could buy shares in almost any business and double their money in 18 months. To make things even more precarious, most people were buying stocks on margin, meaning they'd borrowed up to 90% of the purchase price from brokers. By 1929, $8.5 billion was on loan. What they didn't realize was that they were putting their money, or the promise of it, into a bubble. And bubbles burst. Black Thursday, Monday, and Tuesday wiped out wealth and plunged people into debt, and businesses struggled to pay wages or just collapsed altogether. People had lost their savings and jobs, but they still owed what they'd borrowed to pay for their investments. Desperate borrowers called in loans, but as the debtors defaulted, the banks began to fail. The resulting panic caused a run on the banks, where depositors raced to withdraw their savings. By October 1930, 744 US banks had collapsed. By the end of the Depression, 9,000 had failed, and the supply of money had fallen by 35%. This was an event known as the Great Contraction. There was so little money entering the economy that the US didn't even have to mint any nickels in 1932 or 1933. Surviving banks reduced their lending. Unsurprisingly, really, considering people hadn't been paying them back, this left businesses with no way to raise credit for investment. Production, wages, employment, and therefore demand for goods and services all fell in a domino effect as the ripples of the crash spread out around the country. The fall in demand caused prices to drop by 33%. In other words, they'd entered a period of deflation. Now, at this point, the Federal Reserve should have acted. Had they lowered interest rates, provided emergency lending to failing banks, or bought government bonds to increase the quantity of money, the Great Depression may only have been a run-of-the-mill recession. Frustratingly, raising the money supply and maintaining low interest rates was exactly what they'd been doing throughout the 1920s, which is what had allowed the bubble to grow so huge. Had they just continued with their policies, the economy would have found it much easier to bounce back. Instead, they pulled a massive U-turn and did the opposite of what was needed. Following the stock crash, investors turned to currency markets instead and started trading dollars for gold. As the US was on the gold standard, this caused a run on the dollar and threatened to devalue the currency. So, the Fed responded by raising interest rates, which further restricted money available for businesses and fueled a tidal wave of bankruptcies. During the 1930s, almost no one believed the Fed to be at fault. However, two economists, Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz, would later argue that the Fed was largely responsible for converting what might have been a garden variety recession, although perhaps a fairly severe one, into a major catastrophe. The theory was then confirmed by Ben Bernanke, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, in a speech honoring Friedman, in which he said, "Let me end my talk by abusing slightly my status as an official representative of the Federal Reserve. I would like to say to Milton and Anna, regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We did it. We're very sorry. But thanks to you, we won't do it again." The gold standard wasn't just responsible for the Fed's dodgy decision-making, it was also guilty of transmitting America's problems to the rest of the world and essentially allowing the deflation and the hangover of America's roaring 20s to become a pandemic. At the time of the crash, most large economies were linked to the gold standard through fixed exchange rates. Even countries that avoided bank failures found themselves forced into deflation and a contraction of their money supply, particularly if they wanted to stay on the standard. Ultimately, the sacrifice was for nothing, as every major currency was forced to abandon the gold standard by the end of the Great Depression. In fact, the sooner they did it, the better. As later analysis revealed, those who left early recovered much sooner than those who clung on. Now, you may be wondering where the president was while all of this was happening. Well, president at the time, Herbert Hoover, was well known for his voluntarist principles, which led him to take a ridiculously laid-back attitude to the crisis. He famously stated, "I do not believe that the power and duty of the general government ought to be extended to the relief of individual suffering." Essentially, he believed that the government should have minimal economic interference and that providing help to his citizens would weaken their character, destroy their work ethic, and leave them dependent on handouts. In other words, he thought those plunged into bankruptcy and poverty should just have to deal with it themselves. He also went on the defensive, telling one reporter no one is actually starving and that he had seen one hobo who had managed to beg 10 meals in a single day. His first significant contribution to recovery efforts was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, passed in 1930. The intention was to protect American farmers from overseas competition by imposing heavy tariffs on imported goods. It backfired spectacularly. Countries that had previously exported goods to America didn't take it well. Instead, they retaliated by raising their own tariffs. World trade plummeted 66%, further damaging businesses. GDP growth fell by 6.4%, and the unemployment rate shot up by 15.9%. Eventually, he realized that he'd have to provide some actual help and approved the Federal Home Loan Bank Act, the Emergency Relief Construction Act, and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. These were designed to increase construction of new homes, fund huge public works like dam construction, and loan the banks $2 billion. Ultimately, though, it was too little too late. It wasn't long before the effects of the catastrophe were visible on the streets. Unemployment reached the previously unimaginable height of 25%. That meant 12.8 million people were left unemployed. Farmers who'd lost their land due to foreclosure and the horrifically bad timing of the Dust Bowl weren't even included in that figure. Suicide rates climbed from 12.1 per 100,000 to 15.4 per 100,000 as people lost hope. Americans also turned to breadlines and soup kitchens to feed their families, and children became ill with rickets as they starved and chewed on their own hands. Even Al Capone started his own soup kitchen in Chicago with a huge banner reading, "Free soup, coffee, and donuts for the unemployed." On Thanksgiving 1930, he fed 5,000 a hearty beef stew. Some turned to begging or began small businesses like the 6,000 entrepreneurs who started selling apples on the streets of New York. Others resorted to crime. When the People's North End Bank lost $5,000 to a robbery, the manager decided to install a battery of tear gas canisters above the doors and vaults. He even invited guests to witness the first demonstration, but shockingly, they had to evacuate after only a few seconds. Not all robberies were so fruitful, though. During a depression, there's not a huge amount to steal, and many ended up in jail for thefts of tiny sums. In one case, a man was so desperate for cash that he committed an armed robbery of a drugstore for $27. Grave robbing also experienced a resurgence, but it wasn't for the faint of heart. One particularly unlucky criminal in December 1932 managed to unearth a still very confused and very much alive woman during his attempt in Seattle. Frustratingly, for the curious, how she got there was never solved, but organized crime was probably involved. Marriage and birth rates fell as people feared being able to support a family. Many of those already married sought divorce, but on hearing the legal fee, simply chose to walk out on their wives and children instead. By 1940, 1.5 million married women had been abandoned. People who'd lost their homes, left their families, or were fleeing the Dust Bowl headed for the railways. This mostly included men, but also teenagers known as wild boys or Hoover tourists looking to escape poverty. California, the land of milk and honey, was such a popular destination that the local government ordered burn blockades to turn away anyone without enough money. Some look back on the time with fond memories of freedom and the click-clack of tracks. Others remember being accidentally locked in ice cars for days, sleeping standing up, or beatings by armed freight yard patrolmen or bulls. Murders were also common. In the decade that followed, 24,000 trespassers were killed on the railroad and 27,000 more were injured. The homeless that chose to settle found what materials they could and built their own shacks on the outskirts of cities. One resident in Oklahoma City recalled seeing people living in rusted cars, huts made of orange crates, and one family with several children living in a piano box. These informal settlements became known as Hoovervilles. No two were the same. Some housed just a few hundred, while others grew to support thousands. St. Louis's Hooverville boasted its own mayor, along with churches and other institutions. However, this was not the norm, and life in the camps was usually pretty grim. One Seattle journalist bleakly described the inhabitants' futures as blacker than the soot on the cans they eat out of. The residents also named a few other things after their unpopular president. The cardboard used to replace the soles of worn-out shoes became Hoover leather. Boxes and newspaper used for shelter were Hoover blankets. Turned out pockets to indicate that they had no coins were Hoover flags, and cars pulled by mules when the money for fuel ran out were Hoover wagons. At first, officials fought back, and Hoovervilles were burned or torn down. But residents had nowhere else to go, and just responded by rebuilding them with larger embankments. Eventually, officials gave in, and most Hoovervilles were allowed to stay until the end of the Depression. Much to the surprise of absolutely nobody, Hoover lost the 1932 presidential election and Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated in 1933. With him came his New Deal, a program of economic recovery designed to end the Depression. In his first 100 days, he declared a banking holiday to stop the run on the banks, had 15 major counter-recession bills passed, and created a ridiculous number of federal agencies. These 41 new government bodies were collectively known as the Alphabet Agencies for their alphabet soup of acronyms. They worked to stabilize prices, provide employment, and implement multiple electricity, construction, and art schemes throughout the country. His plan was met with enthusiasm, hope, and gratitude. By the end of the week, 500,000 letters of thanks poured into the White House and thousands more followed. Roosevelt's laws and strategies stabilized the banking system and provided millions of short-term jobs. However, although most economists agree his New Deal kick-started and helped accelerate growth, they weren't aggressive enough to end the recession. Plus, his schemes were doing nothing for the other countries that America had brought down with it. It's frustrating because it would be great to say that economists figured out a solution for recession, and it was something simple that could apply to inevitable future disasters. Unfortunately, the cure wasn't easy. The cure was World War II. The rearmament policies leading up to the war helped stimulate the economies of Europe, and following the outbreak in 1939, unemployment rates plummeted as troops were mobilized. When the US joined in 1941, war spending in the country reignited the economy. Economic growth rates doubled, businesses ignored debt to take advantage of government contracts, and trade relationships were re-established. By 1947, America was producing 40% of global war goods, 50% of the world's manufactured products, 60% of its oil and steel, and 80% of the world's cars. Unemployment rates, which had been hovering around 15% under Roosevelt, plummeted to just 1.2% due to conscription. Of course, this is not to say war is good for economies in general. The standard of living fell, rationing and shortages plagued households, taxes went through the roof, private investment dropped significantly, and between 70 and 85 million, or 3% of the world's population, killed. War is not a cure for economic depression, but in this particular set of circumstances, it ended the worst economic catastrophe in history. This guy can't be blamed. He has an IQ of 50. But if they're saying, just sign this confession to murder and you'll be able to go home, that's not what's about to happen. That's not what's about to happen at all. You're about to never go home. Ever.
That's not good.
Just don't do it!
Don't do it.
Have you ever had a wallet that feels so bulky, it feels like you're carrying around a brick? I had the same wallet since I was 18. It was this leather thing, which was really nice at the start, but then got all saggy as I filled it with crap and receipts and like loyalty cards that I never used. And I said goodbye to that wallet at long last because I got a Ridge wallet, as you should too. Look, I've been using this wallet, I say in the copy, a few weeks, but it's been like at least a year. When did Ridge start sponsoring me? It's been a long time since I've been using this, so I have swapped out. I used to use this burnt titanium one. I think I even used another titanium one. And then I switched to this black one because they sent me loads, so I just kind of tested it out, why not. And then they also sent me something else, the key case, which is sort of like a pocket knife, or like a pen knife for all of your keys. So I put my work keys in here, and then you just like, boom, that does the top lock, the outside lock, the bottom lock, the bins. Easy! And also they've got 30 different styles to choose from, and each one can hold 12 cards. Like, I don't have 12 cards, I got like 2 cards and my driver's license, like a normal human being. But I don't know, maybe you got like 7 loyalty cards or 7 credit cards. I don't know what you're up to, but Ridge will be able to handle it. Also, they've got 50,000 5-star reviews, so you know that you're getting a quality product. And the best part is so slim and compact that you hardly even notice that it's there. Look at this. Look at this. Do you know it's there? No, you don't. So if you're looking for a new wallet or a key case, be sure to check out Ridge at ridge.com/blaze to get the best offer. That's ridge.com/blaze. And look, they're celebrating their 10-year anniversary. So if you make a purchase through March the 26th, you'll save up to 40%. And remember, Ridge is so confident that you'll like it that they offer a 99-day test drive and a lifetime warranty. So what are you waiting for? Get yourself a Ridge wallet, get yourself a key case. There's a link below. Thank you, Ridge, for sponsoring. And now today's video.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brain Blaze. As always, I'm your host, Simon Whammers here. Kevin, thank you, Kevin. Sometimes Danny, sometimes Kevin, sometimes someone else, but Kevin and Danny are the big boys. They write me a script. I've never read it before. Unjust convictions, cases that shocked the world, getting really serious today. It's time to shit all over the justice system. Let's jump in. Generally speaking, laws are a good thing. We haven't got everything worked out yet, and America should definitely get rid of the insane cash bail system. Look, it's not me. Like, I'm British, but Kevin is American. He can talk about. Also, it is insane though. Like, people are always like, Simon, well, you don't you talk shit about America. What do you know about America? And I'm like, well, I heard about the cash bail system, and it seems utterly mental. That it's like, oh, no, you can be free, and you can wander around as long as you have money. So it's like there's one system for rich people, and one system for poor people, which, I don't know, that seems a little bit broken, doesn't it?
What did it cost?
$100 million.
It's like that, the crypto dude, Bankman-Fried. And he's like, yeah, no, he can go on cash bail. $250 million. Oh, God. So much money. You know, also, like, if you're on that much bond, right, if you've got 250 million, it's like, they think you're a mega flight risk, and you're also probably going to go to jail forever. So you'll be like, yeah, I'm sorry, people who gave me 250 million. I am out of here. I am moving to Belize, and I'm never coming back.
Bye.
The chances are you're watching this from a country that has a mostly reasonable set of laws and a well-designed justice system to enforce those laws, and yet things have a tendency to go horribly wrong. I'd argue this isn't because the system is broken, but because the people are. We could have a whole argument about whether the system refers to the laws and proceedings as they are written down, or whether it refers to the entirety of those individuals that would enforce those laws, but let's just agree that people suck and move on. I think it refers to the whole system. Like, the system refers to the system. Well done, Simon. I mean like the whole thing. Like, the justice system isn't just the courts, but it's all the way down to like the Bobby on the street who's making the arrest, to the prison service and all of that stuff. One of the most insane miscarriages of justice that I've ever seen came out of the Philippines and involved the murders of Mara Joy and Jacqueline Cheong by a gang of 8 rowdy youths. I'm not sure if Kevin's about to make a plug for it, but I've definitely done a video about this. Maybe Kevin even wrote it for my Casual Criminalist channel, and that is an insane case. It's insane. And I'm not just saying that so you'll go watch that video after this one. It blew my mind. My mind is blown. I remember having my mind blown while reading it. Go check it out. So I guess I was saying it so you'd go check it out. The father of the Cheong sisters may or may not have been attempting to turn state's witness against his notorious drug kingpin employer, My tablet just let off a really loud sound. Did you hear that? It's like boop, 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 boop. It feels completely unnecessary, but I have obviously multiple sets, and I'd always just got the same iPad and moved it around my different teleprompters, and I was just like, that adds about 3 seconds to my day. So I bought individual teleprompters, individual tablets for all of my sets, and apparently I forgot to mute this one. It's new. It's a new system I'm working on. No one cares. Let's move on. So this dude's turning state's witness against his boss. State's witness is like one of those words I only know just because I've seen movies, and it's like, he's gonna turn state's witness. We gotta take him out. I love those sort of movies. It's always very exciting. Just before his daughters vanished, and the 8 accused kids may or may not have been the children of that drug lord's political rivals. Oh my god. If you live in a country that is that corrupt, I don't know, when was this? Was this a while ago, or is this like modern day Philippines? It's one of those places where I'd always be like, I don't want to go there in case they're like, you know, I don't know, you don't do anything and you can end up in prison or shot.
Welcome to the Philippines, have a look around.
Oh crap. Am I gonna get upbeat? Arrested?
It's like when you go to Asia and you're walking through the airport, and I remember this, there was a sign at Colombo Airport. I'm pretty sure it was Colombo in Sri Lanka. And you'd go in and it'd be like, remember, this country has the death penalty for drug smugglers. And you'll be like, oh my god, I don't have any drugs on me, but that still makes me nervous. I'm not a drug smuggler. I've never smuggled drugs. And I'm still like, what if I do have drugs? What if there are drugs in my bag? I remember once I was leaving that airport, and some dude next to me, so he's just like, I don't know, regular tourist or whatever off somewhere, and we're checking in, and his bag's like over the allowance, and he's like, mate, do you mind putting my bag, because I didn't use any of my luggage capacity, I just had hand luggage, do you mind checking my bag? And I'm like, yeah, I fucking mind. Have you seen the sign about drug smugglers having their heads chopped off? Because, I don't know, it's probably nothing in there, it's probably nothing to worry about, but it's like, bro, I'm not taking someone else's bag at the airport. That's how movies begin, and that's how I end up in prison for the next 20 years, or shot. Come on, what are you talking about? And he was like, oh, yeah, I see. I don't think he had any drugs.
You take drugs or alcohol?
What is drugs?
It's an absolutely insane story featuring a trial where the judge frequently napped, testified on behalf of a witness who pretended to faint, and refused to allow the defense's 50 eyewitnesses to take the stand to provide an alibi because there were too many of them. What the man. At one point in the story, a teenage girl successfully ran 4 armed hitmen disguised as police officers off her school's campus. I don't even remember that part of the story. It's so mental. The Central Park 5. Crime was running rampant in New York City in the late 1980s. In April 1989, a group of about 30 teenagers entered Central Park from Harlem to terrorize joggers and cyclists. Most of their actions amounted to little more than petty crimes. They threw sticks at pedestrians, they mugged them, and they hurled rocks at taxis. What are you up to? What should we do this Saturday afternoon? I don't know, go cause trouble. What are you going to do? Mug people and throw rocks at cars? Fucking hell. That's just like, I don't know, causing trouble that is so beyond causing trouble. But some of their crimes got a little more intense. There were a couple of men they attacked, one of whom was beaten up so badly that he wound up spending 2 days in the hospital. I'm going to throw rocks at cars and then put people in the hospital. Fuck. You're in the center of New York. How's you going to get arrested? He had beer and they didn't, so this seemed like the most logical way to get it from him. This was a pretty severe attack. No shit, he was in the hospital for 2 days, Kevin. And obviously, even the lesser crimes were still quite bad as well. However, these were nothing compared to another attack that was taking place in Central Park at that